A pleasant good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Sunday's edition of the Bub Report. I am happy to be joined by what I truly consider to be a team from the Black Atlantic. We have representation from Canada, we have representation from Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, and Nigeria. Of course, I want to begin this morning by talking about the commemoration of the American invasion of the island of Grenada on October 25th, 1983. In fact, Grenada commemorates this holiday today as Thanksgiving Day. Of course, the invasion of 1983 brought an end to communist rule, and it also restored some semblance of order to an island thrown into fear and chaos following the tragic October 19th events. In examining the history of that period, there are historians who viewed the invasion as imperialist aggression on a small progressive revolutionary island that held alliances with America's enemies, including Russia and Cuba at the time. Other historians hold the view that the invasion was justified because it was meant to protect American citizens and liberate Grenada and Grenadians from an anti-democratic communist regime which imprisoned anyone, including journalists like Tillman Thomas, Leslie Pear, and Alistair Hughes, political opponents, and Rastafarian adherents such as Prince Nan of the Nyabingi movement. I contend that both narratives are in fact valid, that the American invasion should be viewed as imperialist overreach, while at the same time framed as a military exercise that was meant to liberate Grenada, which at the time was under strict shot-on-sight martial law ordered by the Revolutionary Military Council led by General Hudson Austin. On this day, we must, however, also remember all the Grenadian nationals and their Cuban allies who perished in the same way we remember the American soldiers who served at the behest of their president, Ronald Reagan. And now I welcome my first guest who is joining us from Abuja in Nigeria. Chidinma, welcome and good morning and welcome to the Bub Report. It's afternoon where you are in Abuja, yes?
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, good afternoon to you if on that side of the world. Okay,
And
Chidinma, yes, I'm bringing you in today because the world has been gripped by the protests that we've witnessed and the civil unrest we've witnessed in Nigeria over the last 2 weeks. I would begin by asking you this. Are you satisfied? And of course, let me begin by saying that you are a human rights activist and educator, and you are also the past country coordinator of the Africa Youth Movement.
Yes.
But last week or 2 weeks ago, President Buhari said that they were actually going to be disbanding the Sars unit of the Nigerian police. Are you satisfied with those pronouncements?
I wouldn't be speaking for myself alone. Right now,
Yeah.
I'll be speaking for most Nigerians. We are not really satisfied because we've been hearing about the disbandment of SARS since the year 2016. SARS has been in operation since 1992, and up to 2020, we have not seen any good done by SARS. All we have known have been pain and anger. And in 2017, the vice president announced the disbandment of SARS and we were promised reformation, but that was not done. So when we went out to the streets to protest in October and they said we disband SARS, we didn't believe them and we continued with our protest. Right now, the president said they've been disbanded. Committees are being set up to investigate the issues that have been raised by the youth. We're still not satisfied until we get results because we are used to having leaders who make promises and don't fulfill them. So we are not really satisfied with that pronouncement. We want to see action. We want to see them doing it before we believe them. We want to see SARS off the streets. We want to see police reform so they can do their job. We don't need SARS. If we can reform the police, do the job. We don't need SARS.
And to follow up on that, in the process of disbanding SARS, or the pronouncement that SARS will be disbanded, there were no pronouncements with respect to holding the officers accountable. right?
The the various state governors are sending up independent panels to investigate the issues.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said earlier, we are used to seeing this, see them talk and set up committees, but we don't see any action. So they claim, or they made us believe, we also saw them on television, commissioning the committees that have been set up to investigate the issues of police brutality that have been raised, and calling on various families to submit their reports. But we have issues where these officers are known.
Mm-hmm.
We know their names, we know their faces. We raised alarm, and all the governor had to do was sack him. You have the culprit with you. Why can't you arrest him? That was one of the issues that made us very angry. You have this officer with you. The father of the boy he murdered and said to the father, I killed your son, you can't do anything about it. The files are there. You have this man. All you did was to let him go. So we don't really believe them. And until we see the officers being persecuted, until we see them in court, then we'll believe.
Right. Now, in doing some research on this particular issue, it would also appear that there is some lingering dissatisfaction with Buhari's administration as well. Would you say that a lot of the protests also factor into dissatisfaction with the administration?
For so many of us, it's not just about his administration. You know, the protest brought about issues, pent up anger against issues that have been lingering, maladministration, bad governance, which predates before Buhari. Maybe some people started seeing it in Buhari, but for some of us, we've been seeing it right from when we became politically conscious. The issues have been there. The issue of mismanagement, the issues of the healthcare, the education, unemployment. It has been there before Buhari. Of course, the administration came in, and it seems we took 20 steps backwards. But these issues are there before him. So yes, a lot of people came out of the streets in anger, because while many people are angry with him because he acts like he doesn't care. And some of us are of the opinion that he might not really be aware, because we have a country that is ruled by cabals, not just the president. So these people tell him what to do, or he is not aware, or they don't tell him what is happening. So many of us believe he is not aware of what is happening, because you can't be in a burning house and not know that the house is burning. His attitude towards the issues being raised and his speech. You know, when we started the protest, the senators were begging him, talk to the youth. We shouldn't beg our president to address us. We are out on the streets. We are angry. We have so many issues. We're talking about Sars. We're talking about the bad governance. It's expected that the president is going to address us. He didn't do that. So it happened after a series of international calls asking or trying to know what's happening in Nigeria, and the massacre that happened in Lagos. And then he came up, and after the speech, it was worse. People were not satisfied. Like, he didn't mention anything about the killings.
Mm-hmm.
Who sent the soldiers? We want to know. Only the president can give orders for soldiers to shoot, or did the military act on their own accord? So these are the issues that many people are actually angry against Buhari. Of course, the administration has not done well. For me, I don't know about other Nigerians.
Mm. Okay, and finally, before we get to our next segment, we are going to be discussing oil and gas issues with respect to the FSO Nambarima, or there in the Gulf of Paria. But finally, recent census data from the federal government of Nigeria suggests that half of Nigeria's population is actually under 19 years old, which is staggering, right? So, in other words, it's a very youthful population. And it would also appear that that a lot of the SARS violence is targeted against persons within the age of 18 to 30 years old. What is it about Nigeria's youthful population that seem to be the target of that kind of state-sanctioned violence?
You know, this movement actually shocked a lot of the adults in the country. They didn't expect this. We've been branded the lazy youths. We've been branded good for nothing youths, because for years we've tolerated the oppression And let me let you know that before now, the word protest seemed to sound like an abomination to the typical Nigerian youth. When you talk about protest, revolution, you're seen as violent, you're seen as aggressive. Like someone like me, they say I'm very aggressive because I've been talking about this revolution. We need a revolution in Nigeria. We need to get out of the streets. So you find young people like you tell you, you're being so aggressive. You don't address issues this way. I said, no, we've been talking. They hear us, but don't want to act. We have to be on the street. So the Nigerian population, I wouldn't know if it's fair or wow, because actually I'm shocked. I expected myself to be at the forefront because I believe that we're just few who wanted this to happen. But we're shocked to realize that actually these people have been boiling right in there. Young people really wanted to come out, but they've been suppressed. So sometimes it has to do with religious, family values, where we are taught not to question our elders. So the Nigerian population is actually about 70% of the country's population, 70%, with about 50% of them being unemployed. So maybe these youths have to go out there and struggle. And then we have this SARS actually targeting mostly the startups. They have frustrated a lot of startups, talking about the guys in the tech industry. There seems to be this the test for laptops. Once they see you with a laptop, you're obviously a fraudster. Only fraudsters use what they call Yahoo boys. So that has made the young population.
They call them Yahoo boys.
Yahoo boys. So that made the young population a target for SARS, because there's this belief that it's only Yahoo boys that use laptops. So and this also calls for questioning the Nigerian curriculum, because we're analog, we are so backwards. That is why laptop seems to be strange, even to our leaders, that I can own a laptop, I can use a laptop, except maybe I work in an office. But using a laptop in my home, then I must be a Yahoo girl.
Oh.
Many of them are analog. Yes. So we had our placards reading, laptop is not a gun. Most of our placards, laptop is not a gun, iPhone is not a gun, smartphone is not a gun. Welcome to the fourth industrial revolution. You have to you have to join the tech industry. Many young people are there and they're trying to find a way there. So that was really the issue that made the young population a target. The absence of technology.
Wow, that is some education this morning. You have educated me on a lot of what is happening. Chidinma, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Please stay safe, and I look forward to welcoming you back for a future conversation on the developments post this period. Thank you so much, and have a pleasant day.
You too,
okay, folks,
you.
We will be right back. Stay tuned.
Maritime Superintendent of the FSO Nambarima, Engineer Benito Romeo. After the briefing, a tour was undertaken by the Trinidad and Tobago team to the engine room, where there was no evidence of water ingress, nor evidence of water present. They further inspected the generator, boiler, machine control and tank control rooms, and all systems appeared to be functional. Some general observations were that the spaces were well lit with posted emergency signs and procedures, maintained in good condition with no evidence of any fluid leaks. The electrical monitoring systems were in good working order, and there were several instances of redundant systems in place for critical equipment areas. Coast Guard Representative Eisen Warner thanked the Venezuelan host for the opportunity to carry out the inspection and noted that the Venezuelan representatives were very forthcoming in providing information with regards to incidents which would have taken place on board the FSO Nambarima within recent months. Venezuela has started the slow process of unloading oil to further avoid disaster, an operation expected to take up to 35 days. Among the recommendations put forward by the Trinidad and Tobago contingent were that our inspection team conduct a follow-up visit in a month's time.
And welcome back, folks. Thank you and happy to everyone who joined us today for this very important conversation with respect to the FSO Nambarima out there in the Gulf of Paria. And I want to bring in our guest for this segment, Mr. Lazarus Joseph, who he works with the Grenada Ports Authority, but he is here in his private capacity as a marine pilot. And we also have Charlene Ramprasad of the Guardian Media Group. I actually want to begin with you, Charlene, because I know that the Guardian Media Group, you have been doing some reporting on this issue for a while. And it was only after this video went viral that there would appear to be much more visibility on the issue. But what can you tell us? What was the genesis of that interest in that story?
Hi, good morning. So my audio is a little bit spotty on this side, so I didn't catch your question properly. Can you repeat?
Yeah, the question was, what prompted your interest in following that story with respect to the tanker?
Well, I don't know if you'd be aware, but at the end of July into early August, there were photos that were posted on Twitter showing water in the engine room of the Nambarima. And then, of course, when we did a little research, we realized where the Nambarima was located. And obviously, for Trinidad and Tobago, if something had happened to that vessel, the worst case scenario that oil had spilled, that would have meant our coastline would have been decimated by that oil. I mean, it would have meant that a lot of industries would have been shut down, fishing, most of our marine trade that happens in that area, which is like Icacus, Cedrus, those things would have been shut down. The environmental impact would have been very, very severe, because early on when we realized where the Nambarima was and how much oil it was holding, we also realized that in comparison to other oil spills, this would have been, I think, it would have come, if it had happened, of course, it would have come in the top 5 worst oil spills in the world for that volume of oil to be spilled into the ocean. So it was something that we took very from the go. We would have reached out to the employees who posted the photos initially. We didn't get much feedback from them in terms of, how the vessel was doing. But of course, they kept posting, they kept updating Twitter as to what PDVSA was doing about the vessel.
Yeah. So the other question I have, I know that the government said that they did an inspection, a joint inspection with PDVSA on the Venezuelan side. What took them so long? I mean, it would appear that they're doing this joint inspection after the video was published, as opposed to doing something before.
According to the Foreign Affairs Minister, they would have had to make requests to Venezuela, and their visit that happened a couple days ago was actually supposed to happen sometime late September. I would have reached out to the Minister of Foreign Affairs myself, and that was early on in September, asking him, can we get an update on the Nambarima? Can you tell us anything? Has an oil spill model been done for the Nambarima to show us what would be the impact if this vessel does spill, that volume of oil into the Gulf? He didn't respond to those messages. I mean, I was never told, I don't think we ever got any information on an oil spill model. There's a local company, an environmental company that actually they did a model for the Institute of Marine Affairs. But we have been we've been in talks with them, but they've been very hesitant to release the model itself. They give us some of the findings, because with an oil spill model, I don't know if you know, but an oil spill model really shows it is very specific data. So you put in the tides, you put in the weather and all of that at us on, and it maps for those specific properties. So you can't, it wouldn't tell you, okay, for sorry, what the environmental company was worried about was if they released the model itself, that the public might think those were the exhaustive impacts of a possible oil spill, and it wasn't that. So they were very hesitant to release it, because it as I said, it uses very specific data to come up with a model. Of course, the ministries would have been pressed very hard by media, by the Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, who were very, very eager to get some sort of response from the government. And that trip that Gary Aboud and they took on the Friday, we had actually discussed me going out with them, but of course that was sort of, it was an unauthorized trip, and it was a risk basically that they were taking. And there are a lot of security questions that are raised when those sorts of, missions are come up. So I didn't end up going with them. But I mean, if Gary had not gone, it really begs the question as to what would have happened. Would we have seen an actual visit from a ministry's team on our side to this vessel? Because when those photos and that recording that Gary Aboud did, when those things were posted and those things went viral, really then we saw a sort of a pickup in the response. Now, I'm not saying this does not discredit what the ministries may have been doing in the background, but it does come across sort of a reactive, sort of action, because
sort of damage control, if you will, right? Yeah.
Yes, it does. It does come across as that, because we were seeing it was not a situation that developed overnight. It was something that was happening since the end of July. There were concerns since the end of July. So I think I'm not saying that the ministries dropped the ball in any way, right? Because we would not have knowledge of every single thing that happens in the background. But I'm saying, it came across as sort of more of a just reactive than they being proactive.
Gotcha. All right, Charlene, I know that you have some other obligations today, but I thank you for joining us. And I will be keeping in touch with yourself and the other folks at Guardian for any kind of updates that you can provide, because here at the Bub Report, this is a story that we will be following. So thank you again, and you have a wonderful day out there in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much. You have a great day as well.
All right. Now let me bring in Mr. Gill, Mr. Joseph, and Ms. Victor. Ms. Victor, I know that you're having some problems in hearing me, but please bear with us. Let's see if we can get this conversation going. Mr. Joseph, I want to begin with you. I know that in your dissertation, because you actually wrote a dissertation on oil spill scenarios if it were to happen in Grenada. Now, you have been following the Nambarima story as well. Can you tell us? Based on what you have been observing, what has been reporting? Is there anything that would have missed, or that would be inaccurate in terms of the reporting?
Well, good morning, Mr. Bob, and to fellow panelists and the listening public and viewing public. It's a pleasure to be on the Bob Report. With respect to your question, let me remind listeners, oil spill risk is two quantities: the likelihood and the consequence. So the first question is the likelihood. If, hypothetically, if there is a spill from the Nambarima, there is a risk of us being impacted, the consequence of which can be devastating. because in my dissertation I did some modeling of different spill scenarios, and some of them, the response, the cleanup, the economic damage can be in the billions of US dollars. So it is something that we ought to be aware of. The Nambarima case is quite shrouded in opinions, and I hate to comment on opinion. I can only comment on the report from the government of Trinidad stating that they visited the vessel and the risk of spillage or it capsizing is minimal. So that for us is good news. The Nabarima is said to be carrying 1.3 million barrels of crude oil. If any significant portion of that were to enter the marine environment, it is a catastrophe, because your fisheries will be impacted, tourism assets will be impacted, the environment will be impacted, wildlife and the natural habitat of the areas impacted will be severely impacted. Whether or not, if hypothetically again, if that oil were to spill, if it will reach the shores of Grenada, the risk is pretty low. Simply because, not because of spill modeling. As I said, I have not seen any models. And as your colleague said before, the Institute of Marine Affairs in Trinidad is a bit hesitant to release that model because it is instantaneous. You have to put in specific data and you get a specific result for the data inputted. But the situation is dynamic. It changes quite rapidly. But from experience, the Atlantic Empress Aegean Clapton oil spill in 1979 off Tobago resulted in 287,000 tons of crude oil being spilled. And from that event, Grenada did not report any pollution damage. And that today is one of the largest oil spill involving tankers, maritime transport. So,
but we're talking thousands of gallons of oil versus millions of gallons of oil, barrels rather, in the context of the Nabarima. I mean, granted, it's also a storage ship, and that ship in Tobago was an oil transport ship. So there is that distinction there as well.
Yes, well, with the storage, with the tankers, they were moving. It's two tankers that collided. So, and it was in the Caribbean Sea. It's outside the Gulf. Is a cul-de-sac, is a closed, pretty close waterway. And so the oil that escaped off Tobago would have traveled much further initially than the Nabarima if it was to spill.
Okay. Now I'm going to bring in Mr. Gill and Maria, who is Venezuelan. You're a Venezuelan sociologist, educated at the University of Caracas, I believe. But I want to speak to the implications of the U.S. embargo, because I think that is part of the conversation that has not been had, right? You have a U.S. embargo on Venezuela, and you have a situation where a lot of Venezuelan oil and that was carted for export, a lot of it is sitting in the Gulf of Paria. So, Maria, I want to begin with you. Do you feel as if the embargo was justified?
You can ask any Venezuelan, and they will tell you that of course not. That these are coercive measures that are absolutely illegal by a whole host of international laws, which I can tell you about. Look, any risk to our sea, to the Caribbean Sea, or to any ocean in the world is a terrible thing. And if you have a conservative point of view with respect to risks, you would say, yes, we have to make sure that the ocean and the seas are not affected. And so all these modeling and all this work is fantastic. And it's good that it's out there. But let me tell you what is really happening here. the media, of course, there is a media attack on Venezuela, which is linked to the economic attack, which is linked to the diplomatic attack, which is linked to the financial attack on Venezuela. So what does the media do? They know nothing about this ship, which has not left the eyes of Venezuela because all that oil is ours. We don't want it floating out there, right? We need that oil desperately. And what does the press do? Oh, there's this risk that the Caribbean is going to be flooded and it'll be worse than the Exxon Valdez, et cetera, et cetera. They have no data. This is fear mongering, and this is criminalizing Venezuela, which, you know, we should get used to it, that there is no good news on Venezuela. It's always bad, and we're always the culprit. So first of all, I want to thank the authorities of Trinidad, because maybe the world will listen to Trinidad more than they will listen to Venezuela. And the energy minister, Mr. Frank Khan, and his experts went into the ship and saw, you know, Venezuela hasn't forgotten about this ship. PDVSA hasn't sort of written their hands off. What is the real culprit here? The real culprit is the United States and its illegal, coercive measures against a country which is like a bloody medieval siege. We are blockaded. We are blocked, just like they've done to Cuba. But worse than that, because we're in the middle of a pandemic. In the middle of the pandemic, the sanctions have increased. What does this mean? That Venezuela has not been able to buy food, has not been able to buy medicine in the international market. And this during a pandemic, we have been able to cope, thank goodness, because of the true international solidarity of countries like China, Russia, Cuba, of course, the UN, the World Health Organization, the Pan American Health Organization, because they have been able to give us some of these things that we need for the pandemic, we have been able to carry on. Now, how does this affect the ship? Well, in a normal procedure, there would have been other ships would have come and would have siphoned off that petroleum and sent it off to market. But the typical European, the Italian company, ENI, said that, they're not going to do this because their latest tweet, I should say, of October 24th says, the ENI is ready to ensure the safe offloading of the Nambarima upon formal assurance by the U.S. authorities to risk no sanctions either to ENI and its contractors. In other words, the European nations have followed the lead of illegal measures of the United States. And so these sanctions, which have cost 95% of the income of the Venezuelan government because they have stopped PDVSA from selling its petroleum. This is horrendous for any country. In 2017 to 18, as a UN Washington think tank has said, 40,000 Venezuelans have died in that year alone because we couldn't get the medicines. So
okay, let me bring in Ambassador Gill. Ambassador Gill, I'm going to bring in Ambassador Gill here. Ambassador Gill, now you are Grenada's representative to CARICOM, but you also an attorney who specializes in international law of the sea conventions. Now, given that particular embargo that the United States placed on Venezuela, how would that affect, let's say, a private company wants to salvage the loot or the oil from the ship? What do law of the sea conventions state about embargoes?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the program, and pleasant morning to all of the listeners and viewers, as well as my colleagues on the program. International conventions really and truly do not speak specifically with regards to these sanctions that are unilaterally imposed on Venezuela by the United States of America. Now, if you follow the geopolitics in recent times with regards to United States foreign policy on Venezuela. I think Maria put it succinctly when she spoke about these European companies who are scared to do anything, because you see how the US sanctions are framed. Not just that they prohibit United States companies from doing business with Venezuela, but also they prohibit European and international companies that have some sort of monetary or financial interest in the US, and most companies do because of the international financial system. So, for instance, ENI, which is an Italian company, from time to time, of course, they will do transactions in the United States and so on, or monies may have to pass through United States banks and so on and so forth. These European companies are scared that if they do business with Venezuela, in this particular case in Nambarima, that the United States will put sanctions on them. But in terms of international, and that is one of the anomalies, so to speak, with regards to international and how it impacts on a powerful country like the US that is taking a unilateral action. Now, the sanctions on Venezuela is not United Nations sanctions. It is the United States foreign policy with regards to the Maduro government, which is unjustified in international law and has absolutely no basis in international law. It is geared towards regime change, and that's what it's about. Now, just to go back a little bit, Kelon, with regards to the international conventions, and uh, Lazarus spoke well with regards to the the oil pollution regime in the region. Now, Grenada, Venezuela, and Trinidad, they are all members of the International Convention on Oil Pollution Preparedness, Response, and Cooperation. And I saw that the Grenada Ports Authority have initiated and have held meetings with regards to ensuring that they have a state of preparedness. But just to speak with regards to what Charlene has pointed out from The Guardian, in following the report, Venezuela and Trinidad foreign ministries were in contact even before that video with regards to the fishermen and environmentalists in Trinidad went viral. And Venezuela have always insisted that there is no threat. And Venezuela have always said that the vessel is under maintenance, which the Trinidad authorities has confirmed. So it appears to me that really and truly we have had a false alarm, because the vessel, which is a storage vessel and so on, and Maria said it succinctly as well, that floating vessel is merely for storage, so that vessels coming in, doing business with that particular company will take their load and go and to sell to the different countries and so on. But Venezuela, because of its sanction, cannot do business easily. And that is impacting not only on the environmental issues and the threats, but if we follow the present case in the United Kingdom, where the Maduro government is trying to release $1.4 billion worth of gold so that they can sell, so they can put it into the United Nations, so that they can purchase medicine and food to fight the pandemic. The first instance court in the United Kingdom and Britain said that since Britain recognized the Guaido as a president of Venezuela, they did not release it. Now, of course, the Court of Appeal has overruled the High Court, but it speaks to the far-reaching implications of the U.S. foreign policy on Venezuela.
All right, and let me bring in Mr. Joseph and then Maria and Mr. Gill. I'll get back to you guys shortly. But Mr. Joseph, let's just say a worst case scenario, right? In terms of any kind of salvage operation that would need to happen. What kind of response would have to occur? And I think Ken Lee is making an important point here. He says, how robust is our contingency plans in the event of an oil spill in protecting our coastal regions, taking into account ocean currents and other oceanographic factors? But again, it brings me to the question I'm trying to ask. What kind of response would need to be mounted in the event that you have such a major spill in the Caribbean Sea?
Thank you, Mr. Bob, for your question, and Kenley. Well, Grenada, specifically, we have our national oil spill plan. It's a bit dated, 2001. It is under review. And we also have a national oil spill standard operating procedure. Under the Grenada construct, the Grenada Coast Guard assumes the role of on-scene commander if there is a spill. But spill response in the Caribbean is governed by the Caribbean OPRC plan, Oil Pollution Response and Cooperation Plan, under UNEP. So there's a Caribbean OPRC plan, and first of all, oil spill response is a tiered system. So you have tier 1, which is a small spill that the local authorities can manage. In case, like, if you have a spill at the port, or a small spill at the Grand Mall or Queen's Park terminal. Then you have tier 2, which requires national response. And then you have tier 3. Each one, there is a volumetric threshold, but pretty much I like to say once your national system can't handle it, it becomes a tier 3, and you need an international response. That mechanism is in place within Grenada's plan and in the OPRC plan. If, for instance, a tanker coming into Grand Mall has an incident and there's some pollution, the oil companies themselves have formal agreements with international oil spill response agencies. So they will send the equipment and their specialists in to mount the response. And I mean, these people are skilled because they go all over the world and they have, the latest technology and equipment. Grenada has some oil spill response equipment, but these are mainly for tier 1 spill. And we have booms and stuff, but those are near shore booms. They're not for ocean fighting spills in the ocean. That equipment will have to come from our international partners. Further, Grenada has insurance because, as Ali said, we are part of the IOPC fund mechanism. How that works? The ship owner, oil spill, as any pollution in the marine environment, works on the principle that the polluter pays. So if a ship causes pollution, that ship owner has to pay up to his limit of liability under the CLC convention. And if that limit is passed, then the IOPC fund kicks in. But the IOPC fund covers these types of damage: property damage, cost of cleanup at sea and ashore, economic loss for fishermen and persons engaged in mariculture, economic loss in the tourism sector, loss of the cost of reinstatement of the environment, how it was before the spill. Notwithstanding, claimants have to prove that there's actual and quantifiable loss. That is critical. You cannot say that you lost $10,000 because of spill X. And when they look at your books, in the government accounts, you have not paid tax, you have not recorded that kind of economic activity, you would not be compensated.
So,
And
Mr. Joseph, just to stick a pin, is there an actuarian who would be doing that work of calculating what the scope of loss is?
Yeah, well, the IOPC fund will set up the IOPC fund. Once there is a spill, they will set up a claims office in the impacted area, and of course, it is strict accounting. The claimants can be the government as well or state institution, but the principle always is state institutions and governments remain last in the queue. So your citizens who are impacted will be first reimbursed for the economic loss.
Okay. All right, folks, stick a pin. We'll take a break and we'll be right back.
Media coverage. what has happened is that since the US imposed sanctions on Venezuela where they cannot export their crude, that activity had to stop because ENI and its joint venture partner were not allowed to export Venezuelan crude based on the sanction. Another piece of fact that the citizens of Trinidad may not know is because that production has stopped, the FSO Nambarima has been filled with approximately 1.3 million barrels of oil for over 9 months. And that is where the challenge lies. Venezuelans have always said that the vessel is stable and there is no immediate threat of any major environmental disaster. But they did in fact concur with us that to test the veracity of what they were seeing, they would allow a technical team to visit the FSO Nambarima. Mr. Wong indicated the processes we went through to that.
And welcome back, folks. And Maria, I see you were putting your hand up to respond to that. But the U.S. has an election in a week, right? In a couple of days. And we have, it is projected that the Democratic nominee is expected to win the election. With regime change, do you anticipate that there might be a change in policy towards Venezuela? But also on that score, a lot of Venezuelans are also concerned about the leadership of their current president as well. So I know that we've had an election in Venezuela that many say were not necessarily free and fair, but of course that is a sovereign country and they ought to decide the terms on which they conduct elections. And I don't think America should be lecturing anyone on elections, given the voter suppression that happens here. But what responsibility does Mr. Maduro have with respect to the current state of Venezuela? So that's a two-part question.
Well, there are questions there, but there are 3 points I want to make. First of all, Venezuela is an oil-producing country. It has this company, PDVSA, which has been which is in charge of it. We have been producing oil for over 70 years. We have a host of expertise in pollution regulation, pollution prevention. We have tremendous expertise in that. We have had spills, of course, like every petroleum nation has had spills in there. We have never had a disaster like the Exxon Valdez, okay? Never. So I just want to give a little bit of context over that. You know, Venezuela isn't there with closing their eyes as to any kind of danger for petroleum. We take this very seriously, and the environmental ministry is called ecosocialismo. So this is part of our revolution, it's part of preserving the environment. So we are not about to allow our sea, the Caribbean Sea, to be polluted. So I just want to give that sort of sentiment to the people who are here on the program. Second of all, I want to say is this. When I mentioned solidarity, I didn't mention, I'm sorry I didn't mention, the sterling solidarity of so many Caribbean nations who backed Venezuela and continue backing Venezuela in the UN. And I will tell you, these little countries, these little islands have got more dignity than so many of the great, powerful European nations who tremble at the word of an insane American president like Trump. The islands of the Caribbean have been tried to blackmail, they've been threatened, all kinds of terrible things have been thrown at them by this administration in order to get them to vote against Venezuela. And Venezuelans do not forget this, because that diplomatic solidarity of our Caribbean brothers and sisters is really very much in the heart of Venezuelans. Now, the third thing is your question about the United States. Look, in the end, Trump is a monster, and he is bad for the United States, and he is bad for the country because the man is insane. So obviously, I hope that the Democrats win for the sake of the United States, for the sake of the world. But in terms of Venezuela, it doesn't matter because Republicans and Democrats all treat us as if we are their backyard. They think they own the Caribbean. They think they own the whole of the region of South America. And let me tell you another thing. This is my third point, which is very important. I want you to understand. Venezuela is an immensely rich country. We're not talking about sugarcane like Cuba. When Cuba made its revolution, that's the only thing it had. Venezuela has petroleum, has gold, has gas, has a plethora of natural resources, and they want it. If Venezuela produced potatoes, they wouldn't give a damn what happens in Venezuela. And this is a vulgar grab for the immense riches of Venezuela. And another thing is, they don't want a regime change. They don't just want, oh, Mr. Maduro out because, oh, he's authoritarian, he's this and the other. They throw all kinds of things in order to criminalize him. What they want is the dismemberment of the Venezuelan state. And this is, it's even written down. They're going to tear up the territory like they did to Yugoslavia, a piece for Colombia, a piece for Brazil, the gold for the Canadian mining industries who salivate to get hold of the gold of Venezuela. And of course, the great petroleum corporations of the United States. One of the things that the United States could not stand is a successful socialist government in Venezuela, because Venezuela's government under Chavez, under Maduro, elevated the living standards of Venezuelans by 7 places in the UN Human Development rating. That was intolerable because they will not accept that. They want to continue their savage capitalism for everybody. And we are not to be a sovereign nation. And let me tell you something. Venezuela is the country that liberated half the continent from the empire of Spain. And Venezuelans are not prepared to kneel before another empire. And right now, Venezuelans are suffering tremendously, but they are suffering with a government that they know is protecting them from the savagery, from the inhumanity of a government that in a pandemic will not listen even to the pleas of the UN, the pleas of the Pope, anyone's pleas saying, please let this country buy medicines during that pandemic. So there will come a day of reckoning for the United States because they have lost something ethereal but very important, which is the respect of the world, because they have shown that they don't even need an excuse anymore to trample on other countries. They don't even pretend that they're going to follow any kind of international law. And this is very serious.
Okay, Maria. Thank you. We have to get to some closing comments.
Okay,
I'm going to begin with you, so Joseph. Any final thoughts moving forward? And I know you have been following this this story as well. Now, you said earlier that the response plan is under review. When would this review end? I mean, you know, a commenter made the point that it seems as though sometimes anytime you ask someone in Grenada about something, something is always on the review.
Yeah, well, thank you for that comment. I can't speak about everything in Grenada, but I can tell you the National Oil Spill Plan. It is a working document. It is functional as is, but as with any plan, the benefit of the plan is derived when it is constantly reviewed, because everything changes. A plan is a living document, and different players, actors change. You have different policies from government. You have different training needs. You have different scenarios. Look at Nambarima. We never paid attention to the risk posed by Nambarima before. But going forward, we may need to factor that in the national plan. What if? Because these oil spill plans, they center on a lot of what if analysis. What if this was to happen? Can we respond? Our plan mainly dealt with impacts from shipping, because let's face it, south of Grenada, between Grenada and Trinidad, is one of the most heavily trafficked areas in the Caribbean. You have thousands of tons of cargo, oil cargo moving from the Arabian Gulf to the US Gulf and vice versa from the US Gulf to the Far East. So that was our focus. But now we are awakened by the Nambarima situation and the many oil producing rigs outside of Trinidad, which I take into account in my dissertation. The plan has to be able to speak to these risk factors.
All right, Mr. Gill, final comments from you, sir.
I think what the Nabarima scenario has done for us is, as Lazarus pointed out, it has awakened us with regards to our protection and conservation plan in regards to oil spills. But more so, I believe that it put us on the spot with regards to the development of our maritime sector. And in Grenada, generally, the Grenada Ports Authority has the mandate with regards to most of our maritime issues. But I think that we need to have a more holistic approach to our maritime economic frontier. And I believe the time is nigh for us to establish a Ministry of Maritime Affairs or Ministry of the Blue Economy, as it is fancily called now in this particular era. But I think we need to establish once and for all a holistic administrative department of government to deal with all of our maritime resource here in Grenada.
Maria, final words from you.
Well, the final words is that it is in the interest of all our immediate countries to avoid any kind of pollution of our sea, the Caribbean Sea. So this is really important. But I object to people listening to the, the sky is falling kind of media that just wants to point the finger at Venezuela and not realizing that the real culprit is that the sanctions, because the sanctions don't allow Venezuela to sell that oil, and they are stopping this Italian company to take the oil. Also, they're afraid. Now, these sanctions, as I said, in 1 year alone have killed 40,000 Venezuelans. So we are in need of food. We are needing medicine. We need all kinds of elements in order to carry out good environmental protection, etc. And all of this is due to the United States of America and these illegal sanctions. And I want to come back to that last point. What is happening to Venezuela is a threat and an example and a warning to any other country, any one of the countries who want to exert any kind of sovereignty. The United States is saying, we don't give a damn about the international law. And let me tell you something, we should give a damn, because the laws that they are breaking are the fundamental laws to keep world peace. You were talking about the United Nations Charter. We're talking about the International Criminal Court. We're talking about the Geneva Convention. We're talking about the OAS. And they're saying, we don't care. Well, we have to care, because unless we have international laws, we are all vulnerable to the guy with the biggest stick, with the United States, who says, I'll do whatever I like and I will take whatever I like. So we must protect international law. We must not we should not forget, and we must keep on saying, this is a bully. This is a bully who wants to make all our countries just do whatever they want in interest to their corporations. So
on that note,
holds us to remember what the culprit really is here. The culprit really are those illegal, immoral, inhuman. They are crimes against humanity, what the United States is doing.
All right, folks. Thank you so much, Maria. On that note, let me thank all our listeners and viewers to the Bub Report. Next week, we will be segueing into the U.S. elections. It would be the Sunday before elections. Of course, record numbers of people are already voting. But part of that narrative with respect to voting in the U.S. Is the question of voter suppression. Because, there have been attempts to suppress the vote in many parts of the country. And so we would be examining the US elections, but from the perspective of a Caribbean lens here in the diaspora. So I want to thank all of my viewers again. I want to thank my guests. And folks, please don't go. I want to ensure that we network and connect folks across the diaspora. And I just want to thank again everyone who tune into this program every Sunday. Thank you. Have a great week all. Bye-bye.